Now we will begin by taking you through the programming of the 2 gig Edge panel. We will take you through a brief overview of the UI, or user interface experience, as well as explaining some of the features on the panel that you'll notice. Then we'll talk about our zone programming and some of the other advanced programming and panel settings. Here we have the front side of the 2 gig Edge panel. You'll notice things like the microphones, as well as the onboard camera. Down at the bottom you'll have your speakers, and in the upper right we have a panel status LED. There are several statuses that you'll notice on the 2 gig Edge panel. Things like the system ready to arm, system not ready, system armed, and entry delay. So when that is flashing, that will be the entry delay. If we go to the home screen, you'll notice things like the system status to let you know the current state of your panel. You'll also notice the date and time. Also, you'll be able to see things like your arming options of both stay and away, an emergency icon to access your quick access emergency buttons, as well as some system icons, which we'll go through shortly. You have our 2 gig logo. One of the things that is different with the 2 gig Edge is the 2 gig logo now no longer instantly takes you to the installer toolbox, but now when tapped on will show several user features. If you press and hold the 2 gig logo though for 3 seconds, it'll pull up a keypad and you'll be able to enter in the installer code. You also have a current weather forecast and a 5-day, followed by the smart home menu where you can control your lights, locks, thermostats, garage doors, and view your live video feeds for your cameras and alarm.com doorbells. Also, you have your system settings menu located at the bottom. Here, if we take a closer look, we have the system icons. Now, the system icons are pretty familiar to most. We do have a few new ones that you'll notice on there as well. We do have the battery power status, lets you know when the battery is charging. We also have notifications and an option to turn off the display. We also have a new one labeled onboard camera is active. This is to let the user know when the onboard camera is active, simply when it's either taking a photo snapshot, using facial recognition disarm, or simply streaming the camera. You also have your audible beeps, which can be turned on or off, your power status, and if there's an update available. If we go back to the home screen though and tap on the settings button, we can then enter in the installer code. The default 2 gig installer code is going to be 1561. Upon entering that code, you can scroll to the bottom of the screen simply by dragging your finger from the bottom of the screen to the top and select the installer toolbox. Once you select the installer toolbox, you'll have your programming options of panel programming, Z-Wave settings, system tests, camera settings, onboard video, and restore defaults. Let's take a closer look at those. First one I'll show you is Z-Wave settings, as we're going to take you through programming here shortly. This is where you can go to add and remove your different Z-Wave devices, as well as set up your mesh network. System tests is where you can go to test your sensors, your panel. It's where you can also enable our disable sounder feature. The disable sounder feature is a great resource for testing the security system without having the siren blast at full volume. You also have your cell radio status and the cell radio test feature under here. And last but not least, you have your network tests as well. Next we have is our camera settings, where you can go to configure the settings for the onboard camera, as well as add the OnVIF IP cameras. Following that, we have the onboard demo video option, where you can set up your panel to display a demo video. And after that, we have our restore defaults, which allow you to factory default certain features, everything from sensors and zones, console, users, Z-Wave, and network. Let's jump back though and go to our panel programming. When you first select panel programming, it'll bring you to the screen that shows you your different types of zones. We've got wireless zones, your built-in zones, key fobs, and keypads, as well as the image sensors and network settings that can be configured under here. We also do have an advanced programming feature that we'll talk about here shortly. But let's go ahead and select wireless zones. Upon tapping wireless zones, you'll then see a list on the left-hand column there to display all of your current zones. And you can scroll through all 100 zones by simply dragging your finger from the bottom of the screen to the top, or simply select Go to Zone and type in the number. Once you've selected the desired zone, you can simply press Edit Zone to start configuring that zone. After hitting Edit Zone, the screen will display the current zone programming and the left-hand column. So you can now use the left-hand column to select the configurations you'd like to change. Upon selecting a configuration you'd like to change, you'd input the new values in the right-hand column and simply press the down arrow key once your desired selection has been made. Or you can press another option in the left-hand column. The first thing it's going to ask you, though, in zone programming is going to be equipment code. Now, equipment code is critical as this is the make and model of the sensor. You're telling the panel what piece of hardware you're using. And it's important to use the correct equipment code. You can type in the 4-digit code for the equipment codes, or use our drop-down menu. As you see here, we have our list of our equipment codes. We have our E-series as well as our non-E-series. And the list goes on in the same order. One thing to note is that when programming an E-series sensor, you must use the correct equipment code. So it does have to be an E-series equipment code if you're using an E-series sensor. Failing to do so will result in the sensor showing a loss of supervision upon exiting programming. After you've made your desired selection, you simply just press the down arrow key. The next thing it's going to ask you is going to be sensor type. Sensor type is simply asking you how do you want the panel to respond to signals from that zone. And there's two ways you can put it in. You can type in the 2-digit code or simply use the drop-down menu. And here you'll be able to scroll down through the list of our sensor types. Let's go ahead and look at the list of our sensor types to give you an overhead view. So these are all of our different sensor types that you can use in the 2GIG Edge programming. For a complete list of definitions and expectations of each of the results, please refer to the installation and programming guide. Upon selecting your desired sensor type, you'll then proceed to press the down arrow key once again. Upon pressing the down arrow key, it will then take you to the TXID, also known as the serial number. There's two ways you can put it in. You can type it in or learn it in. To learn it in, simply press learn and then trigger the sensor. To type it in, simply locate the TXID or serial number on the back of your sensor. There is also a paste option to paste the previous zone's serial number or TXID if you're using things like a smoke detector to program in the smoke, heat, and freeze detection. But upon hitting learn, the panel will go into a listening mode. Be aware that while in listening, it will pick up any 345 sensor that is operational and within range. So during this time, make sure that only the sensor you're trying to learn is being triggered. Upon picking it up, it will show a TXID has been received and simply press accept. Upon learning in your TXID, you can then go ahead and proceed to press the down arrow key. Once the down arrow key is pressed, the next thing it's going to ask you for is loop number. The way sensor loop numbers work is if a sensor has multiple ways that it can be triggered, then it will have multiple loop numbers. And the loop numbers indicate which trigger the panel is listening for. For example, the 2GIG thin door window contact has the ability of being triggered with just the sensor and the magnet, as well as a hardwired input. Therefore, the sensor and the magnet setup is a loop 2, and the hardwired input is a loop 1. Another example would be the smoke 8. The smoke 8 does smoke, heat, and freeze. Smoke is loop 1, heat is loop 2, and freeze is loop 3. All three features would utilize the same serial number, but utilize different loop numbers. So please refer to your installation guide for the sensor you're utilizing to verify the correct loop number. And then press the down arrow key. Just as an example, let's go ahead and take a look, though, at an example of a loop numbers list. This will give you an example of all of our different sensors and their loop numbers. You'll notice that if a sensor only has one method of being triggered, then it will always be a loop 1, if it can only be triggered by one input, with one exception, the stove and grill guard sensor down at the bottom left, which is a loop 2. Upon choosing loop number, the next thing it's going to ask you for is voice descriptor. Voice descriptor is the words that you can assign to identify and label the individual sensors. To add a voice descriptor, simply press Edit Voice Descriptor. After tapping Edit Voice Descriptor, you'll then proceed to type in the words that you so desire. We have over 290 words, as well as offering the option of doing up to 5 words per voice descriptor. Upon making your selection, simply press Done, and then tap your down arrow key. Upon selecting your voice descriptor and going down, the next thing it will ask you is for a chime. We have 8 different sensor chimes that you can choose from, and you can choose to include a voice name as well with the slider option located below. Upon selecting your chime option, simply tap the down arrow key. One thing to note is the sensor chime can also be configured by the end user from the user's toolbox. Upon going down, the next thing it's going to ask you for is Smart Area Assignment. Only utilize Smart Area Assignment if you are going to have different partitions. At Smart Area Assignment, simply leave everything on Smart Area 1 if you're not going to be utilizing Smart Areas or partitions. And then simply press the down arrow key. Once you go down, the next thing it's going to ask you for is transmission delay. Transmission delay is simply a delay in sending the alarm signal to the central station. By default, this is enabled, but most technicians tend to disable this feature. And to give you a bit of a visual, here we have the difference between entry delay and transmission delay. When you first arrive at the home and the system is armed away, when you first enter the home and trigger the entry delay, you have a countdown timer, or entry delay, to get to the panel and disarm the system. This is on average about 45 seconds, and you can configure this in the panel programming. At the end of that 45 seconds, if the panel is not disarmed, the panel will go into an alarm state. If transmission delay is disabled, it is at this point that the siren will go off and the central station will receive the signal that an alarm event has been triggered. If transmission delay is turned on, though, the siren will still go off, but an additional 30 seconds will pass before the transmission to the central station takes place. After deciding whether to enable or disable transmission delay, simply press the down arrow key. The next section it's going to ask you for is whether or not you want your sensor to report to the monitoring station. By default, this is enabled, but you can disable sensor reports to have a local sensor only. After choosing your desired selection, simply press the down arrow key. The last section that the zone program is going to ask you for is supervision. The way supervision works is all of our sensors at 2 gig, and most other manufacturers as well, send out a supervisory ping every 70 minutes. So every 70 minutes the panel is set to look for that ping if supervision is enabled. If a sensor misses 8 consecutive reports, it will throw what's called a loss of supervision on the panel. If it's programmed as a life safety device, so any of the 24-hour zone types, it only has to miss 4 consecutive reports to throw a loss of supervision. There is one sensor you generally want to disable supervision on, and that is going to be personal panic buttons, or fall pendants as well, as users are in the habit of wearing them and take them out of the home with them out of a habit of just always wearing it. So make sure you check with your user before disabling supervision. At that point, you can go and press Next Zone to continue your zone programming, or simply press the back arrow key to exit out of wireless zone programming. Upon exiting wireless zone programming, we'll now take a look at some of the other features in panel programming. The first one up is going to be the built-in zones. Here you will be able to enable your hardwired contacts on the back of the panel, as well as the onboard glass break. The onboard glass break detector is enabled under built-in zones. Keep in mind that the onboard glass break detector only works in the away mode. Next we have is our key fob programming. Here you can program up to 32 key fob zones. Following that is where we program our 2GIG Edge remote keypads. Keep in mind that the Edge remote keypad must be on the same wireless network as the Edge panel. Now, that can be either the homeowner's wireless network as well as the Edge access point. But to program an Edge remote keypad, simply go to the secondary keypad main screen when it's powered up and simply press Next. Upon pressing Next, it will scan the area for wireless networks. Select the appropriate wireless network, then enter in the password for that network and simply press Next. Upon pressing Next, the keypad will scan the current network it is connected to for the main panel. As it scans for the main panel, it will establish a temporary connection to the main Edge panel. Once that connection is secured, the remote keypad will show a screen similar to this, letting you know to go finish your programming back at the main panel. Once we go back to our main Edge panel, programming for the secondary keypads becomes very simple. One of the great features of the Edge secondary keypads or remote keypads is its ability to auto-discover, therefore eliminating the use to have to go back and forth between panel and keypad to pair the two devices. So once your secondary keypad is on the same network as the Edge panel, simply go through the fields of keypad programming. Simply select Edit Keypad, change it from disabled to enabled, and press your down arrow key. Once you press down, the next thing it's going to ask you for is an equipment code. A reminder, the equipment code is the make and model. There are two available options for the Edge panel's secondary keypad options. You have the Edge remote keypad as well as the very basic Pad 1 that operates on the 345 frequency. If the option is needed to be changed, you can use simply the drop-down menu to select the correct equipment code and then press your down arrow key. But since in this example we're going with the Edge remote keypad, we'll continue on that path to show you the fields that will follow. Next down, it'll show the device ID after you press your down arrow key. It'll ask you to go and press pair keypad, and upon doing so, the keypad and the main panel will sync up. Once that sync is complete, you will see it showing a symbol or an indication that is connected, and you can then simply tap your down arrow key. At that point, you can choose the appropriate smart area if so desired, or leave it on smart area 1, and then press your down arrow key. Upon moving down, the last thing you'll ask is if you would like to label a voice descriptor for that remote keypad. You can choose to do so or leave it blank. Simply, if you do desire to change it, tap Edit Voice Descriptor, type in the new voice descriptor, and select Done. Once you're finished, you can then press your left arrow to exit your keypad programming. One of the other options under panel programming is the Alarm.com image sensors. This is where you can go to pair the image sensors and get their programming set up. Keep in mind that in order to utilize the Alarm.com image sensor, the XCBR3 has to be installed to the panel. Next we have is the network settings, where you can go to connect the panel to the customer's wireless network or begin hosting an access point. The last option in our panel programming is advanced programming. Advanced programming is one of our newer features, the way we have set this up, to match more of the flow and layout of our other programming in our panel. Instead of having system settings, having all the other settings our panel can have, we've broken it up into tiles. Things like system configuration, to allow you to change things like the installer code, disable the siren after two-way, disable smart areas, or give the master user access to Z-Wave or smart home controls. You also have the availability to use alarm.com to set up templates for accounts when they're created to automatically change some of this information. Next, we have our timers, delays, and countdowns. Things like your exit entry delays, bell cutoff times, as well as time to detect an AC loss can also be configured. Under panel configuration, you have the hardware changes, where you can change whether your emergency keys work, whether the onboard cameras are on, or the open collector outputs. Following that, we have a tile for your trouble alerts, where you can disable individual trouble alerts. And following that one, we have our reporting, where you can disable individual reporting features. To save your programming, simply exit out of the programming feature by pressing the left arrow to exit out. At this point, it'll bring you back to the main screen.